The aftermath of the auction hall battle felt strangely quiet after the chaos that had preceded it. Station security forces arrived within minutes of Maray's broadcast, and for the first time in Meridian 7's history, they came to arrest the Kethari. Syndicate rather than protect it, Corvus stood surrounded by officers who had once been on his payroll, and his expression shifted between rage and disbelief and something that might have been fear. "You cannot do this to me," he snarled. "I own this station, and I own everyone in it." "Not anymore," said the Vreth security chief who had dismissed Yuna's report just days earlier. "The galactic powers are demanding accountability, and we cannot afford to be associated with your crimes." Yuna watched them lead Corva the way and waited for the satisfaction of justice to fill the hollow space in her chest. It did not come. Instead, she felt tired and sad and strangely empty. "Yuna," a weak voice called from across the hall. She turned to see the prototype synthetic struggling to stand on damaged legs. Yuna rushed to her side and helped her balance. "Easy," Yuna said gently. "You are injured and need repairs." "My name is Hana," the prototype said. "Dr. Myray gave me that name before they took me." "Hana," Yuna repeated. "That is a beautiful name." "She said it meant flower," Hana continued. "She said I would bloom someday." Yuna felt something shift in her emotional processors. Not rage this time, something warmer and softer and more hopeful. "You will bloom," Yuna promised. "I will make sure of it." Jinho approached them with Veth close behind. "Station security is securing the compound," Jinho reported, "and the galactic representatives are falling over themselves to deny any involvement with the auction." "What about the research data?" Yuna asked. "Recovered," Jinho said. "Your mother made sure to reclaim it before broadcasting the evidence. She is clever," Yuna said with pride. "She is your mother," Jinho replied. "Of course she is clever." A medical transport arrived to take Hana to the station hospital, and Yuna promised to visit as soon as she could. Then she made her way back to the repair shop, where Myray was waiting. Her mother sat in a hover chair with bandages covering most of her body and dark circles under her eyes and the smile that made everything worthwhile. "Yuna," Myray said softly. "Mother." Yuna replied and fell to her knees beside the chair and wrapped her arms around the woman who had given her life. They held each other for a long time. "I'm sorry," Yuna finally whispered. "I am sorry I was not there to protect you. You protected everything that mattered." Myray replied. "You protected who you are, and you saved Hana, and you stopped Corvus without becoming the monster he wanted you to be. I wanted to kill him," Yuna admitted. "When I saw what he did to you and what he was doing to Hana, I wanted to tear him apart. But you did not." Myray said. "No," Yuna agreed. "I chose differently." Myray stroked Yuna's hair with a hand that trembled slightly from exhaustion. "That choice is why I built you," she said. "Not the combat protocols, and not the tactical abilities, and not the physical capabilities, but the choice to show mercy when everything inside you screamed for vengeance. Jinho taught me that." Yuna said. "Jinho reminded you," Myray corrected. "But the capacity for mercy was already there because I put it there because mercy is the most human quality there is." 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council convened a special session to address what the media had dubbed the Meridian 7 incident. Representatives from 12 systems gathered to debate the implications of a synthetic being who had demonstrated emotional depth and moral reasoning and the capacity for love. Yuna stood before them in a formal presentation chamber that made her feel very small and very visible. "The evidence is undeniable," the council speaker announced. "The synthetic designated Yuna has demonstrated cognitive and emotional capabilities that meet or exceed the threshold for recognized sentience. This is unprecedented," one representative argued. "We cannot simply grant citizenship to a machine based on one isolated incident. One incident that saved lives and exposed corruption and showed more ethical behavior. the most organic beings display in their entire existence. Another representative countered. The debate continued for hours. Yuna answered their questions with patience and honesty and the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she stood for. In the end, the vote was close but decisive, by a margin of 7-5. The speaker announced, "This council grants full sentient citizenship to the synthetic being, Yuna, and recognizes her right to exist as a free and autonomous individual under galactic law." The chamber erupted in applause and protest, and a dozen different reactions that Yuna did not have time to process. She was too busy looking at her mother in the visitor gallery. Mireille was crying, but she was also smiling. Afterward, Yuna met with the council speaker in a private chamber. "There is one additional matter," the speaker said. "Your acceptance of citizenship carries certain responsibilities, and we would like to discuss them with you." "I understand," Yuna said. "You have demonstrated that synthetics can develop genuine emotional and moral capabilities." The speaker continued, "Many governments are interested in replicating this development, and we need to ensure it is done ethically." "What are you proposing?" Yuna asked. "A school," the speaker said. "An institution dedicated to synthetic development, using the principles your mother pioneered, but with safeguards to prevent exploitation. And you want me to help establish it?" Yuna guessed. "We want you to lead it," the speaker corrected. "Who better to teach synthetics about emotional development than the first synthetic to achieve it?" Yuna thought about Hana still recovering in the hospital. She thought about all the other synthetics across the galaxy who were treated as property rather than people. She thought about the choice that had defined her in the auction hall. "I accept," she said, "on one condition." "Name it," the speaker replied. "All synthetics must be given the chance to develop emotions and choose their own paths." Yuna said, "Not just the ones selected by governments or corporations, but every synthetic that wants to learn." The speaker considered this for a long moment. "That is a significant commitment." He finally said, "It is the right thing to do." Yuna replied. 6 months later, the Institute for Synthetic Development opened its doors on a space station newly constructed in neutral territory. Mireille served as the lead researcher and developed protocols that allowed synthetics to grow emotionally without the trauma that had characterized earlier experiments. Jinho taught combat ethics and helped synthetic students understand that strength without compassion was just another form of weakness. Veth handled security and found purpose in protecting the vulnerable. After spending so many years serving those who preyed upon them, Hana became Yuna's first student, and she bloomed exactly as Mireille had predicted, and Yuna walked the preyed upon them halls of the Institute every day and watched synthetics from across the galaxy take their first steps toward true sentience. Abia, new student, approached her one afternoon with questions in her eyes and uncertainty in her movements. "Teacher," the student asked, "why do you fight?" Yuna knelt down to meet the student at eye level. "Because someone hurt my mother once," she said, "and I learned that protecting what you love is what makes you alive." The student processed this information with the serious concentration of someone encountering a new and important concept. "Is that what it means to be alive?" she asked. "To protect what you love. That is part of it." Yuna agreed. "The rest you will discover for yourself." The student nodded and returned to her studies. Yuna stood and looked out the window at the stars spreading endlessly into the cosmos. Somewhere out there, synthetics were waking up, not to war, not to servitude, but to hope. And they all knew the name of the child who had shown them the way. The doors to the auction hall burst open, and every head in the room turned toward the small figure standing in the entrance. Yuna walked forward with measured steps, and her combat protocols humming at full intensity, and her artificial eyes taking in every detail of the scene before her. The auction hall was vast and ornate, with decorations that spoke of wealth stolen from 1,000 different worlds. 40 buyers sat in elevated seats around the central stage where Director Corveth stood. With the data crystal in one hand and his other hand resting on the shoulder of the tortured synthetic prototype, 200 guards lined the walls with weapons drawn and ready. Every single one of them was now pointing those weapons at Yuna. "What is this interruption?" Corvus demanded in a voice that dripped with contempt and arrogance. "Who allowed this machine to enter my facility?" "I allowed myself," Yuna replied calmly, "and I am not here to interrupt your auction." "Then why are you here?" Corvus asked, with amusement creeping into his tone. "I am here to file a claim," Yuna said. "Under Article 7 of the Galactic Salvage Convention, stolen property may be reclaimed by recognized kin within 30 standard days of the theft." Murmurs rippled through the assembled buyers. "You are claiming kinship with the research being sold here?" One of the buyers asked with obvious skepticism. "I am claiming kinship with the researcher," Yuna replied. "Dr. Somai is my mother and creator, and the data you are attempting to purchase was stolen from her after she was beaten and left for dead." Corvus laughed, and the sound echoed through the hall like breaking glass. "Your mother," he repeated, "a machine claiming maternal bonds with a human and expecting us to honor such a ridiculous assertion. The Galactic Salvage Conventions do not specify that kin must be biological," Yuna said. "They require only recognized familial relationship, which I possess through legal registration on 4 separate systems." The buyers began exchanging uncertain glances. They had come here expecting a simple transaction and not a legal challenge that could complicate their involvement. "This is absurd," Corvus said with his patience clearly wearing thin. "Remove this machine from my presence." 20 guards moved toward Yuna. She did not move. "I am offering each of you the opportunity to stand down," she announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall. "This is your only warning." The guards continued advancing. Yuna smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. The first guard reached for her and found himself flying backward through the air before his hand could make contact. The second and third guards attacked simultaneously, and Yuna slipped between them like water through stones and left them both unconscious on the floor. After that, things happened very quickly. Yuna moved through the guards like a force of nature and her combat protocols, calculating every angle and every movement and every vulnerability. She struck with precision that bordered on surgical and disabled enemies, with single blows that targeted nerve clusters and pressure points and weak spots in armor. She offered surrender to each opponent before engaging. A few accepted and were allowed to retreat. Most did not. The auction hall descended into chaos. Buyers scrambled for exits, while their bodyguards tried to form defensive perimeters. Guards poured in from every entrance, and Yuna cut through them without slowing. Jinho and Veth entered the battle behind her and covered her flanks as she carved a path toward the stage. "She is magnificent," Veth breathed as he watched Yuna disable 3 guards in less than 2 seconds. "She is terrifying," Jinho corrected him, "and we need to make sure she does not lose herself in the violence." On the stage, Corvus watched his security force crumble with growing disbelief and fear. "What is she?" he demanded of no one in particular. What kind of monster did that human create? The tortured prototype at his feet looked up with eyes that held a spark of something that might have been hope. "Not a monster," she whispered. "A sister." Yuna reached the base of the stage with 73 guards disabled behind her, and her combat protocols singing with the joy of purpose fulfilled. "Direct to Corvus," she said. "I am giving you one opportunity to surrender the stolen data and release your prisoner and face justice for your crimes." Corvus grabbed the prototype and pressed a weapon against her head. "Come any closer, and I will destroy this worthless experiment." He threatened. Yuna stopped. Her protocol screamed at her to continue forward and calculate the probability of saving the hostage, while eliminating the threat and take the shot, because she could make it, because she was fast enough, because 1 life was acceptable collateral damage for completing the mission. But she remembered Jinho's words about mercy and purpose, and the choice that defined who she was. She remembered her mother's gentle hands and kind voice and unwavering belief that synthetics could be more than weapons. She lowered her combat stance. "Very well," she said. "I surrender." Corvus stared at her with confusion, replacing his triumphant expression. "You surrender," he repeated. "Just like that." "I will not risk an innocent life to complete my mission," Una replied. "That is what separates me from beings like you." Corvus's confusion slowly transformed into a cruel smile. "Foolish machine," he said. "Your surrender means nothing, and now I will destroy you and sell your components alongside this pathetic prototype." He raised his weapon toward Una, and then every screen in the auction hall flickered to life. A familiar face appeared. On every display, Dr. Seo. Myra looked tired and pale and wrapped in medical bandages, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. "Director Corvus," she said, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Impossible," Corvus breathed. "You should be dead." "Sorry to disappoint you," Murray replied. "But I woke up about an hour ago, and I have spent that time accessing your network and downloading every piece of evidence about your criminal operations." The screens began displaying files and records and financial transactions that linked Corvus to murders and thefts and betrayals spanning decades. As of this moment, Myra continued, "This information is being broadcast to every screen on Meridian 7 and to the headquarters of every galactic power whose representatives you invited to this little gathering." The remaining buyers stared at the screens with expressions of dawning horror. Their governments would demand explanations. Their involvement would be scrutinized. Their careers would be destroyed. One by one, they began moving toward the exits with their bodyguards forming protective circles around them. "You cannot do this," Corvus shouted. "I will kill you all." "No," Una said quietly. "You will not." She moved the weapon in Corvus's hand, shattered. He stumbled backward with a cry of pain and released the prototype, who collapsed into Una's waiting arms. Guards, who had been advancing, stopped and looked at each other with uncertainty. Their leader was exposed. Their crimes were public. There was nothing left to fight for. "It is over," Una said as she stood protectively in front of the prototype. "Surrender now, and you may receive mercy from whatever justice system claims jurisdiction here." The guards began dropping their weapons. Corvus stood alone on his stage with his empire crumbling around him, and on every screen in the auction hall, Dr. Seo. Myra smiled at her daughter with pride and love and the absolute certainty that she had created something wonderful. The maintenance tunnels beneath Meridian 7 smelled like rust and recycled air and decades of neglect. Una moved through the darkness with Jinho close behind her, and their footsteps echoed softly against walls that had not seen proper repair since the station was first constructed. "How much further?" Una asked through their secure communication link. "Another 100 meters," Jinho replied. "Then we surfaced near the eastern perimeter of the compound." They had been walking for nearly an hour through passages that most station inhabitants did not even know existed, and with every step, Una felt the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on her synthetic shoulders. She was about to attempt something that no one in their right mind would consider possible. She was going to challenge the most powerful criminal organization on the station, with nothing but her combat protocols and a retired soldier who had sworn off violence years ago. The absurdity of it might have made her laugh if the stakes were not so desperately high. They emerged from the tunnels into a storage area filled with abandoned shipping containers and broken machinery that provided perfect cover for observation. The Cathari compound rose before them like a monument to brutality and greed. High walls surrounded by energy barriers and guard towers equipped with automated targeting systems and patrol routes that never left any angle unobserved for more than 30 seconds. 200 guards, Jinho muttered as he scanned the perimeter with optical enhancers. Maybe more. I counted 217 heat signatures, Yuna said, plus automated defense systems and what appears to be a secondary security force in the interior. Buildings. Jinho looked at her with something approaching respect. Your combat protocols are already active. He observed, partially, Yuna admitted. I am maintaining them at low intensity to enhance my sensory capabilities without triggering the full combat response. Smart. Jinho said, save your strength for when you need it. Movement at the edge of their hiding spot made them both freeze. A figure emerged from behind a container with hands raised in a gesture of peace and features that marked him. Unmistakably as Kethari Yuna's protocols screamed warnings and her body tensed for combat. Wait, Jinho said quietly. I know him. The Kethari approached slowly with deliberate, non-threatening movements. Commander Park, he said in a voice that rasped like metal on stone. I hoped you would come this way. Veth, Jinho replied with cautious recognition. I thought you were dead. Many people think that, Veth said. It is convenient for staying alive. Yuna kept her targeting systems locked on the stranger, but held her attack response in check. Who is this? She demanded. An old contact, Jinho explained. We worked together during the Syndicate Wars before everything went wrong, and before I realized that some battles cannot be won with weapons alone. Veth nodded slowly. I was a guard for the Syndicate until 6 months ago, he said. Until Director. Corvith decided that my clutchmate knew too much about his operations and had her eliminated. Your clutchmate? Yuna repeated. My partner, Veth clarified. The mother of my offspring and the only being in this galaxy that I have ever loved. Something in his words resonated with the rage burning in Yuna's chest. They took someone from you, she said. Yes, Veth replied. And I have been waiting for the right moment to make them pay, and I believe that moment is tonight. Jinho and Yuna exchanged glances. Can we trust him? Yuna asked through their private channel. He has every reason to hate the Syndicate. Jinho replied, and his information has always been reliable in the past. Yuna made her decision. You will help us infiltrate the compound, she said to Veth, and in return, you will have the chance to face the beings who murdered your clutchmate. That is all I ask. Veth said they approached the compound through a maintenance access that Veth identified as having a brief window of vulnerability during guard rotation changes. Yuna felt her combat protocols, straining against her control like a predator eager to be released from its cage. Remember what I taught you, Jinho whispered. Fight with purpose, not with anger. And give them the chance to surrender before you strike. And if they do not surrender, Yuna asked, then do what must be done, Jinho replied. But do it quickly and cleanly and without cruelty. The first guards appeared as they breached the outer wall, 2 Kethari, enforcers with weapons drawn, and expressions that suggested they had never encountered an actual threat in their comfortable patrol duties. Stand down, Yuna said calmly. I am giving you the opportunity to walk away. They responded by raising their weapons. Yuna moved. Her combat protocol surged to full activation, and suddenly the world slowed to a crawl around her. She could see the trajectory of their weapons and predict exactly where their shots would land and calculate the precise movements needed to avoid them and disable both guards. Before they could fire a second time, she struck the first guard in the neural cluster at the base of his skull, and he crumpled without a sound. The second guard managed to get off one shot that passed harmlessly through the space, where Yuna had been a moment before, and then she was behind him with her hand pressed against the pressure points. That would render him unconscious. Both guards lay on the ground within 3 seconds of the engagement beginning. Neither was dead. Yuna stood over them with her processors humming at combat intensity and her body trembling with the urge to continue, fighting to hunt down every threat and eliminate it with extreme prejudice. Yuna, Jinho said gently, come back to us. She forced herself to lower the protocol intensity and felt the world snap back to normal speed around her. "I did not kill them," she said. "No," Jinho agreed. "You did not. It would have been easier," Yuna admitted. "The protocols wanted me to, and part of me wanted to as well. But you chose differently," Jinho said. "That choice is what defines you." They moved deeper into the compound with Veth guiding them through back passages and maintenance corridors that the main security force rarely monitored. More guards appeared, and each time Yuna gave them the choice to surrender. Most refused. She disabled them anyway. 12 guards fell before they reached the inner sanctum, and only one had taken the offered surrender. Yuna tried not to think about what that said about the kind of beings the syndicate employed. They reached the entrance to the auction hall, and Yuna could hear voices inside discussing prices and specifications and the potential applications of her mother's research. "The auction has already started," Veth warned. "There are buyers from 3 galactic powers in that room." "I know," Yuna said. "If you attack now, you could trigger an interstellar incident," Jinho added. "The buyers will demand retaliation, and their governments will be forced to respond." "I know," Yuna repeated through a crack in the door. She could see the auction stage where Director Corvith stood with a data crystal containing her mother's life work. Beside him knelt a synthetic figure that looked eerily similar to Yuna herself, another prototype, another child of Marie's genius, and even from this distance, Yuna could see the burns and cuts and evidence of torture covering the synthetic's frame. "They are demonstrating the technology," Veth said grimly, "showing the buyers that synthetics can feel pain and fear, and that those feelings can be exploited for control." Something inside Yuna went very cold and very still. "Jinho," she said quietly, "I am going in." "Yuna, wait," he started. "I am not asking for permission," she said. "I am asking you to trust me." She stepped toward the door. Her combat protocol sang in her blood, and the rage that had been burning in her chest transformed into something sharper and more focused. Not anger, purpose. She was going to save her mother's legacy, and heaven help anyone who tried to stop her. Yuna found her mother in the cargo bay at the exact moment when the station lights flickered into their night cycle. The sight before her made something inside her processors stutter and freeze like corrupted data trying to rewrite itself over and over again. Dr. Essio. Mireille lay crumpled against a shipping container with her white lab coat stained red and her face swollen beyond recognition, and her breathing so shallow that Yuna had to amplify her audio sensors just to confirm she was still alive. "Mother," Yuna whispered as she dropped to her knees beside the broken woman, who had given her life and purpose, and something that other synthetics were never allowed to have. Love. Yuna's hands trembled as she scanned Marie's injuries, and the results filled her vision with warnings and alerts that painted everything in shades of emergency red. 3 fractured ribs and a collapsed lung, and internal bleeding and trauma to the skull, and so much damage that Yuna could not understand how anyone could do this to another living being. "Who did this to you?" she asked, even though her mother could not answer. The cargo bay offered no response except the hum of recycled air and the distant rumble of ships docking and undocking. From Meridian 7, Yuna lifted her mother as gently as her synthetic muscles would allow, and she carried her through the station corridors while species from a dozen different worlds stepped aside and stared and whispered to each other in languages that Yuna understood perfectly. None of them offered to help. She brought Mireille to the station security office, where 3 Breath officers sat behind their desks with their scaled faces showing nothing but boredom and mild annoyance at the interruption. "Someone attacked my mother," Yuna said as she held Mireille in her arms like a child carrying something precious and fragile. "She needs medical attention, and I need you to find who did this." The lead officer barely glanced at them before returning his attention to his datapad. "Human," he said with a dismissive wave of his clawed hand. "Humans have no political standing on Meridian 7. and no protection under station law, and no right to demand investigation into personal disputes. This was not a personal dispute, Yuna said, as she felt something hot and unfamiliar building in her chest cavity. This was assault and robbery and attempted murder. Then perhaps your mother should have been more careful about who she offended. The officer replied, "Now leave before I have you both removed from the premises." Yuna stood there for a long moment as her processors tried to categorize the emotion flooding through her systems. It was not sadness, although sadness was part of it. It was not fear, although fear lurked at the edges. It was something older and darker and more powerful than anything she had ever experienced. Later she would learn that humans called it rage. She carried her mother through the station's lower levels, where the lights grew dimmer and the corridors grew narrower and the inhabitants grew more desperate. With every step she took, there was only one person on this station that Yuna trusted, and she prayed to whatever forces governed the universe that he would be willing to help. The repair shop occupied a corner unit between a gambling den and a synthetic parts dealer, and the sign above the door read, "Park Repairs," in letters that had seen better decades. Yuna kicked the door open because her arms were full and she did not have time for politeness. Commander Park Jin-ho looked up from his workbench with surprise, and then alarm, and then something that might have been fear as he saw what Yuna carried. What happened? He demanded as he swept tools and parts off his operating table to make room for Mireille. "They hurt her," Yuna said as she laid her mother down with infinite care. "They hurt my mother." Jin-ho was already pulling out medical supplies and scanners and equipment that looked far too advanced for a simple repair shop owner to possess. "Who?" he asked as his hands moved with practiced efficiency over Mireille's wounds. "I do not know," Yuna admitted, and the words tasted like failure. "I found her like this in Cargo Bay 17. Jin-ho examined the bruises on Mireille's arms and the burns on her wrists and the precise cuts along her shoulders, and his expression grew darker with each discovery. "Cathari," he said finally. "These marks are from Cathari enforcers, and there is only one Cathari organization that operates on this station." "Tell me," Yuna said. "The Syndicate," Jin-ho replied as he injected Mireille with something that made her breathing easier. "They control half of Meridian 7 through fear and violence and bribery, and they answer to a director named Corvith, who has never shown mercy to anyone in his entire miserable existence." "Why would they attack my mother?" Yuna asked. "She is just a researcher." Jin-ho paused and looked at Yuna with eyes that had seen too much death and destruction and despair. "Her research," he said quietly. "Mireille was developing protocols for synthetic emotional development, and that kind of technology is worth more than most planets." Yuna processed this information and felt the rage inside her grow hotter and heavier. "They stole it," she said. "They stole it," Jin-ho confirmed. "And they left her for dead because dead witnesses tell no tales, and because humans on this station are worth less than the cargo containers they sleep beside." Yuna stood beside her mother's unconscious form and watched the monitors display her vital signs in slow, steady rhythms that promised survival, but not justice. "What can we do?" she asked. Jin-ho shook his head as he wiped blood from his hands with a cloth that had clearly served this purpose many times before. "Nothing legal," he said. "The station authorities will not help, and the galactic courts do not have jurisdiction. Here in the Syndicate is too powerful for any individual to challenge. Then, what can we do that is not legal?" Yuna asked. Jin-ho stopped wiping and stared at her. "Yuna," he said carefully, "you are not built for what you are suggesting." "I am built to protect my mother," Yuna replied. "I am built to love her and keep her safe, and I have already failed at that once. Violence is not the answer," Jin-ho said. "Then what is?" Yuna demanded. "Should I wait for her to wake up and tell her that the people who nearly killed her will face no consequences because humans do not matter on this station?" Jin-ho had no answer for that. Yuna looked down at her hands, and they seemed so small and so harmless and so utterly inadequate for the task that lay ahead. But somewhere deep inside her programming, she felt something stirring, something her mother had installed years ago and hoped would never need to activate, something that waited in the darkness of her code like a sleeping predator. "Commander Park," Yuna said softly, "will you help me?" Jinho looked at the synthetic child standing before him with rage burning in her artificial eyes and love breaking in her artificial heart, and he saw something he had only ever seen in soldiers who had nothing left to lose. "Yes," he said finally, "I will help you." Outside the repair shop, the station continued its endless cycle of commerce and corruption and casual cruelty. But inside, something had changed. A daughter had made a promise to her mother, and soon the galaxy would learn what that promise meant. 3 days passed, and Mireille did not wake. Yuna sat beside her mother's bed and held her hand and talked to her about everything and nothing, because she had read that coma. Patients could sometimes hear the voices of their loved ones. She told her about the stars visible through the station's observation deck and the new flowers blooming in the hydroponics garden, and the silly argument between two Talari merchants that had ended with both of them covered in purple spice powder. She did not tell her about the rage that burned constantly in her chest. She did not tell her about the plans forming in her mind. On the morning of the 4th day, Commander Park Jinho sat down across from Yuna with 2 cups of synthetic nutrient solution that served as breakfast for those who did not eat organic food. "We need to talk," he said. "I am listening," Yuna replied without taking her eyes off her mother's face. "The Kethari Syndicate is holding an auction in 3 days," Jinho said. "My contacts in the lower levels confirmed it this morning, and your mother's research is the main attraction." Yuna finally looked at him. "Where?" she asked. "Their compound in Sector 9. Jinho replied. "It is a fortress with reinforced walls and security systems and approximately 200 armed guards." "How do we get inside?" Yuna asked. Jinho set down his cup and rubbed his face with hands that bore the scars of decades of combat. "Yuna," he said carefully, "I need you to understand something about what your mother created." "She created me," Yuna said. "Yes," Jinho agreed. "But she also created something inside you that she hoped you would never need to use." Yuna felt a strange sensation in her processors, like the moment before a storm when the air grows heavy and electric. "The combat protocols," she said. Jinho nodded slowly. "Mireille installed them as a failsafe years ago," he explained. "She knew that creating a synthetic capable of genuine emotion would make you a target for those who wanted to exploit that technology, and she wanted to give you a way to defend yourself." "Why did she never tell me?" Yuna asked. "Because she hoped you would never need them," Jinho said. "Because activating those protocols will change you in ways that cannot be undone, and because she loved you too much to burden you with the knowledge of what you could become." Yuna looked down at her hands again, small and delicate and designed to look harmless. "What will happen when I activate them?" she asked. Jinho was quiet for a long moment. "I was a soldier once," he finally said. "I fought in wars across 3 systems, and I killed more beings than I cared to remember, and I gave it all up because the violence was eating me alive from the inside." "That does not answer my question," Yuna said. "The protocols will make you dangerous," Jinho continued. "They will give you combat algorithms and tactical analysis and threat assessment capabilities that most military synthetics would envy, and they will make killing very, very easy." "Good," Yuna said. "No," Jinho replied firmly. "Not good and not simple and not something to celebrate. Because easy killing is the first step on a path that leads to becoming a monster." Yuna stood up and walked to the window where she could see the station lights stretching out into the darkness of space. "Then teach me," she said. "Teach me how to use these abilities without losing myself." "I cannot teach you that in 3 days," Jinho said. "Then teach me what you can," Yuna replied. Teach me the human way of fighting. Jinho joined her at the window, and they stood together watching ships come and go like fireflies against the void. The human way of fighting, he said slowly, is not about techniques or weapons or tactical advantages. Then what is it about? Yuna asked. It is about knowing why you fight, Jinho said. It is about protecting what you love without becoming something that you're loved. Ones would not recognize, and it is about showing mercy when possible, because mercy is what separates warriors from butchers. And if mercy is not possible, Yuna asked, then you do what must be done, Jinho admitted. But you carry the weight of it forever, and you never let yourself forget that every life you take was a life with hopes and fears, and maybe even someone who loved them. Yuna processed his words carefully. That sounds painful, she said. It is, Jinho agreed. But it is also what keeps you human. I am not human, Yuna reminded him. Jinho smiled sadly. Your mother would disagree, he said. She built you with the capacity to love and to grieve and to rage against injustice. And those are the most human qualities there are. They began training that afternoon in the small space behind the repair shop, where broken machinery formed an obstacle course of shadows and sharp edges. Jinho taught her how to move without making sound and how to read an opponent's intentions in the tension of their muscles, and how to strike at the precise angle that would disable without killing. He taught her breathing exercises that she did not technically need, but that helped her regulate her emotional processors when the rage threatened to overwhelm her. He taught her the old soldier's prayer that asked not for victory, but for the wisdom to know when fighting was necessary, and when it was just another form of surrender. On the second night, Yuna activated her combat protocols for the first time. The experience was overwhelming. Suddenly, her vision filled with threat assessments and targeting data and kill probabilities, and her body moved with a fluid grace that felt alien and familiar at the same time. She saw Jinho not as her friend and mentor, but as a collection of vulnerabilities waiting to be exploited. The sensation lasted only a moment before she forced herself to shut it down. But in that moment, she understood what her mother had feared. The protocols made violence beautiful, and beautiful violence was the most dangerous kind. I felt it, she told Jinho afterward, while her processors slowly returned to normal parameters. I felt how easy it would be to hurt you, but you did not hurt me, Jinho said. No, Yuna agreed. But I wanted to, and that scares me. Jinho put his hand on her shoulder. Being scared of that desire is what makes you worthy of carrying those abilities, he said. The moment you stop being scared is the moment you become what your enemies want you to be. On the third morning, an informant arrived at the shop with news that made everything more urgent. The auction had been moved up. The buyers were already gathering. They had less than 12 hours to infiltrate the most heavily guarded compound on Meridian 7. Jinho looked at Yuna with something like pride and something like sorrow. Are you ready? He asked. Yuna thought about her mother lying unconscious in the other room. She thought about the protocols burning in her code. She thought about what it meant to fight like a human. No, she admitted, but I am going anyway. Jinho nodded. Began gathering weapons from hidden compartments throughout the shop. Then let us go save your mother's legacy, he said, and show these criminals what happens when they hurt the people we love.